Welcome to Echo Horror Files. Every park has its secrets. Some are forgotten, others are still waiting in the dark. Tonight I'll share one of the reports that never made it to the public. Before we begin, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel so you never miss a new story. Now, let's begin. Story 1. I took the posting at Loonvane because I wanted to be a place where no one could reach me, and I got exactly what I asked for, which is the first lesson this story has to teach. My name is Ansel. I am a seasonal ranger, or I was, and for the record I want the dates and the details set down plainly, because the people who read a thing like this always want to decide whether the man writing it was tired, or drinking, or grieving, and I was two of those three. And I will let you guess which two. The station sits at the north end of a lake in the far reaches of the Superior Country, up where the roads give up being roads and become suggestions. The nearest town worth a word is a 2-hour drive on gravel, and the last 40 minutes of that you do at 15 miles an hour because the frost heaves the surface into a washboard that will loosen your fillings. The old maps do not call the water Loonvane. That is the name the trappers settled on when they mangled the older name, the one the Ojibwe who summered there had used long before any survey stake went into the ground. I was told the old word meant something close to the water that answers, though the man who told me admitted he was only repeating what his grandfather claimed and his grandfather liked the story. I write it here because it matters later, and because I would rather you learn it now, while it is only a name. I accepted the job in March, over the phone, from a district office that smelled of burned coffee, even through the receiver, which is a thing I know is not possible, and yet remains true in my memory. The woman who hired me was named Junie, and Junie did not oversell the position. She said it was remote. She said the last man had left mid-season and had not filed his final reports, which meant a pay dispute I would inherit and untangle. She said I would be alone for stretches of 2 and 3 weeks, resupplied by a floatplane when the weather allowed, and by nothing at all when it did not. She asked if that was a problem. It was not a problem. That was the point. 11 months before that phone call, my brother had walked into the Chippewa forest with a day pack and a fishing rod, and had not walked out. His name was Cole, and he was 3 years younger than me. And the search that followed was the largest the county had run in a decade. We covered 11,000 acres. We used dogs and a helicopter with a heat camera and 200 volunteers in orange vests, walking arm span apart through the brush. We found his rod leaning against a birch upright, propped there with a care that no accident produces. We found nothing else. Not a boot, not a bone. The case is open. It will always be open, because open is what they call it when they mean they have stopped looking. So when Junie asked if the solitude was a problem, I heard a different question. I heard, do you want to go where the woods are and sit in them and be near the thing that took him, even if it is a different patch of the same green dark? And I said, no, it is not a problem, and I meant yes. The station was a single cabin, cedar shake and a tin roof gone the color of an old nickel, set back 30 yards from the shore on a shelf of granite. Inside there was a wood stove, a cot, a table, a shelf of field guides swollen with damp, and a radio the size of a suitcase that connected me to Junie at base twice a day at 0800 and at 1800, weather permitting. There was a logbook, spine broken, its pages 100 years of ranger handwriting, each one recording the mundane commerce of the wilderness. Water level, loon count. A bear on the portage. A canoe party of 4, permit checked, courteous. I read the last entries the man before me had made, a ranger named Dell, and they were ordinary for a long while, and then they were not, and I will come to that. The lake itself was 2 miles long and narrow, bent like a hook around a granite point, and it was the most beautiful water I have ever seen. In the evening, it went to hammered copper, and then to slate, and then to a black so complete that the sky poured itself into it, and you could not find the seam between them. Loons called across it at dusk, that long falling cry that people who have not heard it think is sad, and people who have heard it know is something older than sad. I would sit on the granite shelf with a cup of coffee going cold in my hand, and I would listen to them. And for the first weeks, it was the only medicine that worked. I want to be honest about those first weeks because it would be easy, knowing what comes, to paint them dark from the start. They were not dark. They were good. I fixed the dock. I cut and split a winter's wood, more than I would need, because the work emptied my head in a way nothing else had since coal. I logged the loons. I checked the 2 permitted parties that came through in June and found them decent and careful, the way the deep backcountry tends to filter for. I slept without the dreams. The lake gave me that, and I was grateful, and I want it on record that I was grateful before I was afraid. The first thing that was wrong, I did not even file. It was too small. On a morning in early July, walking the shore path to check a beaver dam that was flooding a portage, I came on a deer standing knee-deep in the shallows, facing the far shore, motionless. Nothing strange in that. Deer water at dawn. But it did not move as I approached, not at 10 yards, not at 5. A whitetail will let you get close if the wind is wrong, but its ears track you, its tail flags. Its whole body is a strung wire waiting to fire. This deer was a slack thing. Its ears did not turn. When I was near enough to see its eye, the eye was aimed at me and did not blink. And there was no wetness of alarm in it, no wild thing at all. I clapped my hands. The sound went out flat over the water and came back wrong, a beat too late, and the deer turned its head, only its head, the neck rotating farther than a neck should rotate, and looked at me the way a man looks at you across a bar when he is deciding whether he knows you. Then it stepped up onto the bank and walked into the trees, and its walk was the walk of a deer, and I stood there with my hands still stinging from the clap, and told myself I had watched a sick animal, brainworm, or the wasting disease, and I moved on. I did not file it, but I remembered it. The way you remember the first cold you catch after a good year, when you had almost forgotten the body could turn against you. That night I read further into Dell's logbook, past the ordinary years, into his last spring. And I found the first line that made me stop, and read it again, and set the book down, and look out the black window at the black water. He had written it in a hand that was steadier than the words deserved. Heard my own voice on the water again. Did not answer. Note for whoever comes after me. It will call twice. Answer neither. I am a practical man, or I was raised to think of myself as one. And a practical man reads a line like that and reaches for practical explanations. Dell had been alone too long. That is the plain truth of the backcountry ranger. And everyone in the service knows it. You put a man out where there is no other voice for weeks, and his mind begins to keep him company, however it can. It talks to itself. It hears the wind and the pines shape itself into syllables. There is even a name for the false voice a tired brain builds, and I told myself the name, and it helped for about a day. What did not help was that I began to hear it too. The first time, I was on the granite shelf at dusk with the coffee going cold, in the ordinary way, and across the water from the far shore where no trail ran and no party was permitted. A voice said my name. Ansel. Just that. Not loud. Carried on the still air the way a voice carries over water, which is to say very well, better than it has any right to. I stood up so fast the coffee went across the rock. I called back hello, and my hello went out and did not return, and nothing answered it. The loons had gone quiet. I stood there until the light failed, and I heard nothing more. And I went inside and bolted the door, which I had never bothered to do. And I lay on the cot and told myself a party had come in off permit, kids probably, and had read my name off the register box at the landing and were having a laugh. It was a good explanation. I have used it since. It has the great virtue of being possible. The trouble with it was the register box. In the morning, I hiked a mile down to the landing where a paddler signed in, and I opened the steel box, and the last name in it was from 11 days before, a party of 2, out on the 4th, and no one had signed in since. And the road beyond the landing had no fresh tracks in the June mud, and the mud takes a tire the way wet cement takes a hand. No one had driven in. No one had paddled in. And yet a voice had known my name and had chosen, out of everything it could have said, to say only that. I want to be careful here. I am not going to tell you I knew in that first week of it that something was wrong with the world. I did not know that. What I knew was that I was a grieving man, alone in the woods hearing things, and that the honest and responsible course was to consider that the problem was inside my own skull, and I considered it. I radioed Junie at the evening check and asked, as casually as I could make it, whether the previous ranger had ever raised any concerns, any incidents, before he left. There was a silence on the line, the kind that is not the radio. Then Junie said Dell had put in for transfer twice, both times denied for staffing, and had left on his own the third time. Without notice, driving out one August night and not coming back for his last check. She said it in the flat way people say the thing they have decided not to think about. Then she said, "Is everything all right up there, Ansel?" And I said everything was fine. And we both let the word fine sit there doing its work. The wildlife kept being wrong in small ways I could almost ignore. I found a moose track crossing a mud flat, deep and clean, and I followed it out of nothing but professional habit, and it walked 40 feet in a straight line and stopped, both prints side by side, and did not continue in any direction, on any surface, as though the animal had reached that spot and been lifted off the earth. I found a stand of jack pine where every bird had left, not one call, not one movement. A silence with edges to it, and at the center of the silence, a deer skull set upright on a stone, clean of flesh, older than the season, placed, not fallen, placed. I told myself a trapper's marker, an old bit of woods humor, and I did not touch it, and I went home the long way. It was the old man who gave me the shape of the thing, though he would not have called it that. His name was Otis, and he ran a trap line in the winter and a boat for the odd fishermen in the summer, and he came up the lake once a month in a battered aluminum skiff with my mail and a case of the coffee I could not get otherwise, and he was the only human face I saw for weeks at a stretch. Otis was past 70 and had lived on that water his whole life, and his father before him, and he did not waste words. I did not tell him what I had heard. I asked him instead, over coffee on the dock, whether the old name for the lake really meant the water that answers. Otis looked at me for a long moment. Then he looked at the lake. Then he said, "My grandfather would not fish the far shore, not the whole east side. He said it was fine to look at and no good to be on." I asked why. Otis turned his cup in his hands. He said, "My grandfather said the water learns you. He said if you were a talking man, a man who called out, sang, whistled to himself, the water learned your voice, and one day would give it back. And the thing you had to know, the only thing that mattered, was that it never got you the first time. It called you close with your own voice. And then when you were close enough, it called you again in the voice of someone you loved and lost. And that second voice was the one that finished you. Because a man will not go to himself, but he will go to his dead." He drank his coffee. He said his grandfather liked a story. He said it the way you say a thing you have decided to believe is only a story because The alternative is not a way to live. Then, standing up to leave, gathering his line, not looking at me, Otis said one more thing, and it is the sentence I heard in my head every night after. He said, "You look like a man who lost someone, Ranger. And that is the wrong kind of man to leave up here alone." I did not answer that. I watched his skiff grow small on the copper water and vanish around the granite point, and the loons started up again the moment the motor sound was gone, all at once, as though they had been waiting for him to leave. And I went inside and read the rest of Dell's log, all of it, every last entry. And by the time I finished, the wood stove had gone cold, and the window was full of the dark, and I understood that whatever had happened to the man before me was now going to happen to me. The call came in on a gray morning in the last week of July. Junie's voice on the radio cutting through the static, all business. A father and daughter overdue. They had launched 3 days before from the landing to the south. A permitted party of 2, a man named Cyrus and his daughter, a girl of 9 named Wren, on a route that should have brought them past my end of the lake and out again in 2 nights. They had not signed out. The father's wife had called it in when they missed a phone check from the road. Junie gave me the permit details, the description, the color of the canoe, and asked me to work north from my station, while a second team worked south from the landing, and to check in on the hour. This was the work. This was, in the deepest place, the reason I had come. If I could not find my own brother, I could at least go into the green dark after someone else's, and bring them back, and be for another family the thing that no one had been able to be for mine. I packed a rescue kit and a radio and a headlamp and a wool blanket, and I went. And for the first hours, the fear that had been living in me went quiet, because I had a task, and a task is the oldest medicine there is. I found their canoe at midday, pulled up on a gravel spit on the east shore, the far shore, the shore Otis's grandfather would not set foot on. It was overturned, which a canoe should not be when it is beached for a portage, and one paddle was in it, and one was gone, and there were prints in the gravel going up into the trees, a big set and a small set, and the small set was running. A child does not run into a forest away from her father. A child runs after, or a child runs from. I called their names into the trees. Cyrus. Wren. My voice went up the slope, and the slope ate it. I want to be exact about what happened next, because it is the center of the whole thing, and because I have gone over it 1,000 times, looking for the ordinary version, and I cannot make it hold. I went up the slope after the prints. The forest on that shore was old-growth cedar and hemlock, the canopy so tight that the light came down green and dim, and the floor was soft with 100 years of fallen needle, and it took prints beautifully, and I followed the running child and the big man for perhaps a quarter mile, up and over a ridge, and at the top of the ridge the prints stopped, both sets. Side by side, the way the moose prints had stopped, on soft ground that continued soft in every direction, and beyond them, nothing, no scuff, no drag. No sign that 2 human beings had gone 1 step farther. I stood at the end of those prints with my heart going hard, and that was when I heard the girl. Wren's voice off to my right, down the far side of the ridge, thin and high and afraid, calling, "Help, help me, please." A child's voice, unmistakable, the pitch of it, the crack in it. I went toward it, and of course I went toward it. There is not a version of me that does not go toward a child calling for help, and I think whatever it was knew that. I think that is exactly what it was counting on. I went down the far slope fast, calling back, "I'm coming! Hold on! I'm coming!" And the voice moved. It stayed ahead of me and to the right, always the same distance. "Help! Help me!" And I went faster, and the slope grew steeper, and the trees thinned, and I came out of them at a dead run onto a shelf of bare granite, with the girl's voice right in front of me. Help, right there, close enough to touch. And there was nothing in front of me but air, because the shelf ended in a drop of 60 feet to a talus of broken rock. And I went down onto my hands with the momentum, my head and shoulders out over the edge, the loose grit rolling off the lip and falling and taking a long time to land. And from below me, from the empty air over the drop where no child could possibly be, the voice said, one more time, gently, almost kind, help me. I did not answer it. I do not know how I knew not to. Perhaps it was Dell's line living in my head. Answer neither. Perhaps it was Otis. Perhaps a man on his hands at the edge of a 60-foot drop simply has no breath to spare for answering. I crawled backward off the lip, and I sat with my back against a cedar, and I shook, and the voice did not call again. The forest was silent. The birds were gone, and I understood sitting there that the child had never been on that ridge, that the prints had stopped because whatever made them wanted me exactly here, on this shelf, at this edge. I found the real Cyrus and Wren an hour later, and this is the part I have never told the report in full. I found them by their smell of wood smoke, a small, illegal fire they had built against the cold and the fear, tucked in a hollow a half-mile north off any route. The father with a broken ankle, and the girl wrapped in his jacket, both of them alive, both of them frightened past crying into a kind of stillness. And when I came into their little clearing and knelt down and said, I am the ranger. You are safe now. The father looked at me, and his face went the color of the ash in his fire. And he said, no. He said, you already came. He said, you came to the shore 2 hours ago, and you called to us from the water. You called Wren by her name. You said, come down to the shore. Ranger's here. And we started down, and Wren stopped. Wren said, that's not right, Daddy. He's on the wrong side of the water, and thank the ever-loving that she stopped us, because your voice, mister, your exact voice, was calling us out onto the ice shelf. And there is no ice. It is July, and I looked, and there was no man there. There was no man there at all. I got them out. That is the part I hold on to on the nights I need something to hold. I splinted the father's ankle with a paddle shaft and cordage, and I got the two of them down to the water, and I paddled them the length of the lake in the dark, with the girl in the bow wrapped in the wool blanket, and the father amidships, gray with pain. And I did not once, the whole length of that black water, let my eyes go to the far shore, though the whole length of that black water I felt the far shore watching me leave with what it had wanted. The float plane took them out at first light from the landing. The girl, Wren, before they loaded her, looked back at me and said, thank you, Ranger. And then she said in a smaller voice, don't go back up there. And a child of 9 should not have the eyes she had when she said it. I should have gone out with them. I know that now, the way you know the turn you should have taken from the ditch. I did not go out with them because I told myself the season had a month left, and a ranger does not abandon his post over a fright, and because underneath that, in the place I do not like to look, some part of me had heard something in the account the father gave. You already came. You called Wren by name. It had used my voice before I ever reached that shore, which meant, if Otis's grandfather was right, and the water learns you and gives you back, that it had learned me fast, in a matter of weeks, faster than it had learned Dell across the whole season. And I could not stop turning over the reason why, and the reason why was that I was, as Otis had said, the wrong kind of man to be up here alone, a man with a hole in him, a man already leaning toward the dark so that it did not have far to pull. The nights after that were bad in a way I will try to set down plainly, without decorating it. Because the plain version is worse. It came to the cabin. It had never come to the cabin before, and now it came every night, and it came as sound. The first night, it was a knocking on the door, low down, a foot off the ground, the height a thing on all fours would knock if a thing on all fours had a hand. 3 knocks, patient, spaced. I did not open the door. I sat on the cot with the axe across my knees, and I did not open the door, and after a while the knocking stopped. And then it came at the window, that same height, and I did not look. And I want to tell you I did not look because I was brave, and the truth is, I did not look because Otis's grandfather had said a man will go to his dead, and I did not trust what I would do if I looked and saw, in the black square of the window, a shape I knew. The second night it did not knock. The second night the radio came alive at 0300. The big suitcase radio that only reached base twice a day and never at night, and it hissed and popped, and then Junie's voice came out of it. And Junie's voice said, "Ansel, come in, Ansel, are you all right?" And I almost answered. My hand was on the handset, and then Junie's voice said my name a second time, and it was not Junie's voice anymore. Underneath, it was underneath something that was only wearing Junie's voice, the way a coat is worn. And I took my hand off the handset, and I unplugged the radio at the wall, and the voice kept coming out of it with the power off. "Softer, Ansel. Why won't you answer, Ansel?" And I put the radio out on the granite shelf in the rain and shut the door, and it went on out there under the sky until dawn. And in the morning, it was an ordinary radio again, and it worked fine. And Junie at 0800 said she had not called and had not been on the air all night. No one had. The channel had been dead. I read Dell's log by lamplight in those nights because I could not sleep, and because it was the only company I had that I trusted, being the words of a man who had sat in the same cabin and heard these same sounds and, for a while, kept his head. His last month of entries mapped my own like a photograph of a place I was standing in. Heard my own voice on the water. Did not answer. Deer on the shore, wrong. The birds gone from the east stand. Then the family. He too had gone after lost people, a pair of hunters, and he too had been called to an edge in his own voice and had not gone over. And after that, the entries changed. After that, it stopped using his voice and started using another, and he did not write whose. He only wrote, "It has found the one I will not be able to refuse, and it is not fair, and I am going to leave before it finishes learning them." His last entry was 3 lines. It has her almost right now. 2 more nights, and it will have her exactly. I am leaving tonight while the voice it has is still a little wrong, and I understood then what had happened to Dell, or believed I did. He had not been finished. He had run. He had driven out that August night, not because he was a coward, but because he was a man who knew himself, who knew that when the far shore called to him in the voice of whoever he had lost, and got it exactly right, he would go, and no line from a logbook and no old man's warning would hold him. He had left while the voice was still wrong. He had gotten out by 2 nights. I counted the nights I had left in the season. I counted the nights the thing had been coming to the cabin. And I did the arithmetic that Dell had done. And I understood that I was going to have to leave too, and that I was going to have to leave before it learned the voice I would not be able to refuse, which was a voice I had been hearing in my sleep for 11 months, propped upright against a birch tree in the Chippewa forest, and which I would follow off any edge in the world if it called me by my name and asked me to come home. The first snow came early that year, in the last days of August, which happens in that country and which the old-timers read as an omen, even when it is only weather. It came in the night with a wind behind it, and by the time the gray of morning bled into the cabin, the whole world had gone to white, and the lake had a skin of gray slush at its edges, and the far shore was a smudge of black timber under a low sky. I had already decided to go. The float plane was due in 2 days for the end-of-season pullout, but I had decided I would not wait for it. I would take Otis's route, the water route south to the landing, and drive out, and I would file whatever I had to file from the safety of a town with streetlights and other faces, and I would never say the true reason to anyone until now. I packed in the morning. I loaded the canoe at the dock while the snow came down and stuck to my shoulders and to the gunwales, and I worked fast because the light was already strange, already going, though it was barely noon, the storm eating the day. And I was 3 trips into the loading, coming down from the cabin with the last of my kit, when the thing did what it had been building toward all along, and it did it not at night, in the dark, in the safe theater of nightmares, but in the flat, gray daylight with the snow falling straight down, which is the detail no one believes, and which is the reason I believe it myself, because a mind that invents its terrors invents them in the dark. Cole's voice came across the water. I had not heard my brother's voice in 11 months except in dreams, and dreams soften a voice round it, and I had begun to lose the true edges of it, the way you lose a face you cannot stop trying to hold. And here it was with all its edges, from the far shore, across the slush and the falling snow, saying my name the way only he said it, with the little laugh under it he always had, as though whatever he was about to tell me was already a good story. Ansel. And then, Ansel, it's me. And then, Ansel, I got turned around out here. I've been out here so long, will you come get me? I want you to understand that I knew. There was no moment in which I did not know. I knew it was the water. I knew the true edges of the voice were true because the water had learned them, had been learning them all season, had reached into the hole in me and pulled up the one voice I could not refuse and gotten it at last, exactly right, 2 nights ahead of schedule, hurried by the storm or by my leaving or by nothing but its own hunger. I knew all of it. And I stood on the dock in the snow with the last of my kit in my hands, and I began, without deciding to untie the canoe because he had been out there so long, and he was turned around, and he had asked me to come get him, and I am his older brother, and it was my whole life's one job to go get him, and I had failed at it once in the green dark of another forest, and here was the chance to not fail. Here was the water offering me the thing I wanted past all sense and past all fear, which is the only thing it ever offers, which is the only bait that works. I had the bowline in my hand and 1 foot in the boat. What stopped me was not courage. I want that understood, for whoever reads this, whoever comes after me the way I came after Dell. It was not courage, and it was not faith, and it was not the memory of an old man's warning. It was the loon. One loon, out on the slush water in the falling snow, gave that long falling cry, the cry that people who have not heard it think is grief, and people who have heard it know is only a bird telling the lake it is alive. And the ordinary sound of it, the real sound of a real living thing that wanted nothing from me, cut through the voice of my brother like a hand through smoke. And for 1 second, I heard the 2 sounds at once, the true loon and the false brother, and I heard that the brother had no breath in it. It called my name, and my name had no breath under it. Cole's voice had always had too much breath, had always been a little out of wind from laughing. This had none. It was perfect, and it was empty. And the emptiness was the one thing the water could not learn, because the water had never been alive, and so it did not know that a voice is mostly the breath of the living thing behind it. I took my foot out of the boat. I did not answer it. I did not shout at it, did not curse it, did not tell it I knew, because Dell had taught me the last lesson in his log, the one written in the steadiest hand. And the lesson was that you answer neither call, not the first in your own voice, and not the second in the voice of your dead, you do not give it one more syllable of yourself to learn. You take back your breath and you go. I finished loading the canoe with the voice going on and on across the water, softer now and then pleading, then at the very end, angry in a way that no grief is ever angry. And I pushed off from the dock and I paddled south down the length of Loon Vein through the falling snow with my back to the far shore, and I did not look at it, not once, though the whole 2 miles I felt it watching me take away the thing it had worked all season to earn. I made the landing at dusk. I drove out on the washboard gravel at 15 miles an hour with the heater roaring and the snow turning to rain as the land dropped. And I did not stop until there were streetlights. I never went back. The service sent someone for my kit and to close the station for the winter. And the following spring they posted the opening again, Loon Vein, remote, resupply by float plane, and I thought about the person who would answer that phone, and I did the only thing I could think to do, which was to write it all down and send it up with Junie to be left in the cabin, in the logbook, on the last page after Dell's, in the steadiest hand I could manage. Heard my own voice on the water, did not answer. Then it heard the one voice I could not refuse, and it got it almost right, and it will get it right for you too, faster than you think. Because it learns the wound and not the man. It will call twice, answer neither. And if you are a person who has lost someone, and I think the far shore only ever calls the ones who have, then do not wait for the plane. Go now. Go while the voice it has for you is still a little wrong. There is no shame in the going. There is no medal for the staying. The water learns you, and the water is patient, and the water has all the winter in the world. I am out. I am writing this from a town with other faces in it, but I will tell you the last true thing. The thing I have not told anyone, and then I am done. Some nights, even here, even now, I sit by a window and I wanted to have gotten his voice exactly right one more time before I left. Because it was him. Every edge of it was him. And there is a place in me, small and cold and honest, that is sorry I did not go get my brother out of the water. That is the part the far shore counted on. That is the part it is still counting on, and whoever is up there now, reading this by lamplight while the snow comes down and the loons go quiet, and something on the far shore clears its throats and begins softly to learn. Answer neither. Before we move on to the second story, if you enjoyed this one, don't forget to leave a like and a comment. It lets me know you've made it this far and helps the channel grow. Now, let's move on to Story 2. Story 2. My name is Elan Wren, and for 6 years I have been the only ranger stationed at Naskeek Lake, deep in the North Main woods, in a place so far from any paved road that the drive-in takes the better part of a day and ruins a set of tires every season. I am telling you this the way it happened to me in order, and I am leaving nothing out. Because the last man who kept the station left things out, and I have spent a long time paying for what he did not write down. People always ask why a person would take a job like this. They picture something noble, a man who loves the quiet, a man who wants nothing but pine air and cold water and his own company. That was not me. I came to Naskeg because I was running, and the woods were the only door I found that would close all the way behind me. 2 years before I signed the paperwork, my younger brother Jonah drowned. He was 22. We were on a lake far south of here, a friendly lake, a lake with a public beach and a lifeguard chair that nobody was sitting in. And I was on the shore reading a paperback while he swam out past the rope. I heard him call my name once. I looked up, I saw an arm, and I told myself it was a wave. I want you to understand that I told myself it was a wave for the length of time it takes to turn a page. And by the time I stood up, the water had gone flat and even, and there was nothing on it at all. They found him the next morning. For 2 years after that, I could not look at open water without hearing my own name in his voice, and I could not sleep in a house with other people breathing in it. So I sold what I had, and I applied for the loneliest posting the state maintained, and Nascaig was it. The station sits on the eastern shore of the lake. It is one log cabin, older than it has any right to be, with a wood stove, a hand pump, a radio that works when the weather allows it, and a generator I am supposed to run only in emergencies. There's a dock. There is a canoe and a small aluminum boat, with a motor that I am not to trust. Behind the cabin, the forest climbs a long ridge, spruce and fir and old white pine, and it goes on unbroken for more miles than most people can imagine, all the way to the border and past it. My job is simple to describe. I watch for fire, I check the few backcountry sites, I log the weather, and when hikers or paddlers go missing, which they do more often than the brochures admit, I am the first and sometimes the only person who goes to find them. The ranger I replaced was a man named Gideon Ross. He had held the station for 11 years, and when I arrived to take the keys, he did not look like a man ending a long career. He looked like a man leaving a house he had heard something moving inside of. He was thin in a way that food does not fix. He shook my hand on the dock, and he kept glancing at the tree line the way you glance at a dog you do not fully trust. Gideon walked me through the cabin fast. Stove here, radio here, first aid here, spare fuel there. Then he stopped at the small desk under the window, and he put his hand flat on a thick logbook, bound in green cloth, and his voice changed. "Read this," he said. "Every ranger who has kept this station has kept this book. It is not official. The state does not know it exists. But you read it, and you follow what is in it, and you add to it, and you leave it for whoever comes after you." I asked him what was in it. "Rules," he said. And then he took his hand off the book, like it had gotten warm. I thought he was an old man being strange. I have since learned that the strangest men in the woods are usually the ones who have paid the most attention. Before he left, standing on the dock with his one bag, Gideon told me 3 things, and I wrote them down that first night because the way he said them made me want to. He said, "The animals here will tell you before you know it yourself. When they go quiet, you go inside." He said, "If you hear a person calling for help from out on the water at night, you do not answer and you do not go, no matter whose voice it is." And he said, "It will learn your voice last. That is when you must stop trusting your own ears." Then he got into the float plane that had brought me, and the plane lifted off the flat gray water, and I was alone at Nascaig for the first time. I remember standing on the dock a long while after the sound of the engine was gone. The lake was enormous and still. The forest came right down to the shore on every side and made a wall the color of deep moss. It was beautiful. I remember thinking it was beautiful, and I remember also that I did not once, in that first hour, hear a single bird. That night I lit the stove and I opened the green book. The first entries went back more than 50 years in handwriting that changed as the rangers changed. Most of it was ordinary. Weather, bear sightings, a drowning in the 60s, a lost boy found alive in the 70s. But threaded through the ordinary pages were other lines, set apart, underlined, some of them traced over so many times the pen had nearly cut the paper. "Do not answer the water. The elk came to the dock and would not leave. Bad 3 nights after. Heard my mother. My mother has been dead 9 years, stayed inside. It is using the loon call now. It is getting better at it." And near the back, in Gideon Ross' own tight hand, A single line and then no entry for 11 months after it, as if he had stopped writing for nearly a year. It knew Danny name. I never told it Danny name. I closed the book. The fire was warm and the cabin was solid, and I told myself that every remote station collects its ghost stories, that men alone in the woods write poems to their own fear, that this was folklore and nothing more. I believed that for about 3 weeks. I want to be honest with you about that. For 3 weeks, Naskeg was only a job, and a good one, and the loneliest piece I had ever known. Then the birds stopped all at once on an ordinary afternoon in early September, and I remembered what Gideon had said, and I felt the first cold finger of understanding press against the back of my neck. The first person I helped at Naskeg was a paddler named Merrick who had flipped his canoe on the north end of the lake and lost his gear. I found him because his partner had reached me on the radio, and I took the aluminum boat out and brought him in, shivering and grateful, wrapped him in a wool blanket, fed him, and had the float plane collect him 2 days later. It went the way it was supposed to go. He thanked me. I felt useful in a way I had not felt since Jonah. I logged it in the official book, and I did not think to write anything in the green one, because nothing about it had frightened me. I tell you about Merrick so you understand that I knew the job. I want you to know that I was competent, that I read the weather, that I could find a person in that country, that I was not a nervous man imagining sounds. Everything that came after came to a man who knew what he was doing, and that is the part that I still cannot make peaceful in my mind. The birds stopped on a Tuesday. I was splitting wood behind the cabin, and I became aware of the silence the way you become aware that a clock in another room has stopped ticking. There had been chickadees and jays and the small, constant business of the forest, and then there was nothing. No wing, no call, no scratch of a squirrel. The quiet had a weight to it. It sat on the whole basin like a held breath. I stood there with the axe in my hand, and I turned in a slow circle, and I heard Gideon's voice in my memory. When they go quiet, you go inside. I did not go inside. I want that on the record, too. I was a reasonable man, and I did not run indoors because the birds had taken a break. I finished my wood. But I will tell you that I finished it faster than I meant to, and that I kept the tree line in the corner of my eye the entire time, and that when I carried the last armload to the porch, I did not look behind me, and I hated that I did not look behind me. The animals came after that, not attacks. Nothing so simple as an attack. What came was worse because it did not fit anything I knew. There was a doe. She came out of the spruce at the edge of the clearing 3 days after the birds went silent, and she stood at the far side of the open ground and looked at the cabin. Deer do not do that. A deer that sees a man freezes, then flees, then forgets you. This doe stood in the open in full afternoon light and faced the cabin and did not move. I watched her from the window for an hour. She did not graze. She did not flick her ears at flies. She stood with her legs slightly too straight and her head slightly too level, and she watched the door. When the light started to go, I stepped out onto the porch to haze her off, and she did not startle. She turned her head to follow me, only her head, the way a person turns to keep looking at you when the rest of them is still, and I saw that her eyes were catching the last light wrong, too flat, too dry. And I went back inside, and I shut the door, and I did not open it again until morning. In the morning, she was gone. In the grass where she had stood, there were no tracks at all. That night was the first time I heard it on the water. I woke a little after 2. The cabin was cold, and the stove had burned low, and the lake outside the window was a sheet of black glass under a thin moon. And from somewhere out on that water, far out, past where any swimmer would be, a voice was calling. Help. Please. Somebody help me. A man voice, hoarse, breaking on the second word, the way a real voice breaks. It carried across the flat water the way sound does at night on a lake, close and clear, as if the man were only 100 feet from my dock and drowning. Every part of me that had ever worn the uniform stood up at once. Someone was in the water. Someone was dying in the water while I lay in a warm bed. I was on my feet and reaching for my boots before I knew I had moved. And then I heard Gideon. If you hear a person calling for help from out on the water at night, you do not answer, and you do not go, no matter whose voice it is. I made myself stop. I made myself stand in the middle of that cabin with one boot on and listen, really listen. The way you listen to a thing you are trying to prove is real. And what I noticed, once I was still, was this. The voice was not moving. A drowning man drifts. A drowning man goes under and comes up in a different place, and his cry changes as he takes in water. This voice held one spot on the Black Lake. Exactly one, and it called with the same 3 words in the same order. "Help, please! Somebody help me!" With the same breath and the same break on the same syllable, again and again, like a recording of grief played on a loop by something that did not understand what grief was for. I stood at that window for what felt like an hour and did not answer. Toward the end, the voice changed its words for the first time. It stopped saying help. It said very clearly, across all that water, in that same broken man voice, it said my name. Elan. I had told no one at that lake my name. Merrick had known it, but Merrick was 2 counties gone. I had spoken my own name aloud perhaps twice in 6 weeks, and now it was coming to me off the black water in a stranger voice, patient and even. And I understood, finally and completely, that the Green Book was not folklore. I got back into my cold bed, and I lay there, and I did not sleep. And near dawn, the calling stopped all at once, mid-word, the way a faucet stops, and the birds came back an hour later, as if nothing had happened at all. I could have called it in. I have asked myself many times why I did not get on the radio the next morning and tell my supervisor that something was wrong at Nasgeg and that I wanted out. I think part of it was pride. I think a larger part of it was Jonah. I had come to that lake to sit with a thing I could not face, and here at last was a thing that came when the sun went down and stood on the water and called my name in a drowning voice, and some ruined part of me could not walk away from it. If the woods wanted to punish me, I had decided somewhere below thinking, then let the woods try. So I stayed. And 11 days later, the radio crackled with a report of an overdue party, and the job took the decision out of my hands. 2 hikers, a man and a woman, experienced, permitted for a 5-day loop that touched the far northwest arm of the lake. They were 3 days past their exit date. No word. The woman's sister had raised the alarm. I was the nearest person by 40 miles. I packed a field kit. I took the boat to the head of the northwest arm, and I went in on foot to find them, the way I had found Merrick, the way I had been trained. The forest on that side of the lake is old and close. The canopy shuts out most of the light even at noon, and the ground is soft with 1,000 years of needles, and the trees stand so near together that you lose your lines of sight after 20 feet. It is beautiful country, and it is bad country to be lost in. And I moved through it, calling out the hikers' names the way you are supposed to, steady, spaced, giving them time to answer. I found their first camp by mid-afternoon. It was intact. Tent up, food properly hung, a small fire ring, cold and long dead. Nothing wrong with it except that they had left it and not come back. Their packs were gone, but a water bottle sat on a rock, upright, half full, the way a person sets a thing down, meaning to pick it up again in a minute. I logged the position, and I kept moving north along the route they should have taken. The light was starting to lengthen when I first heard the woman. She was ahead of me, and to the left, off the route, up a shallow draw, and she was crying and calling out, not screaming, weeping the tired way people weep when they have been afraid for a very long time, and calling a man name, calling it over and over, "Dana, Dana, where are you?" And it was the most human sound I had heard in weeks, and my whole body turned toward it. I got maybe 40 feet up that draw to run before I stopped. I stopped because of the doe. I stopped because of the voice on the water saying help in the same breath 100 times. I stopped because something in the pattern of the crying was too even. The sobs spaced too regularly, the name landing on the same note each time. Dana, pause, Dana, pause, without the ragged catch that real exhaustion puts in a voice. It was close now, in the trees just above me, and I could not see her, and I made myself do the hardest thing I have ever done in that country. I made myself go quiet and not answer and just listen. And the crying stopped the instant I stopped moving, not trailing off, stopped, cut clean, the way the voice on the lake had stopped my name mid-word. The draw went silent. The whole forest went silent. That same weighted, breath-held silence, and I understood that the birds had left the trees around me sometime in the last few minutes, and I had been too fixed on the crying to notice. I stood there in the failing light with my heart going, and I could feel the way you feel a person standing behind you in a lit room, that something was up the draw looking down at me and deciding. Then it tried again, from the same spot in the same woman voice, but it had made a mistake. And the mistake is the thing that has stayed with me longest. It did not know I had gone silent because I had grown suspicious. It thought I had gone silent because I could not hear it well. So it got louder. It called Dana again, louder, and then it called, "Help me, please," in the woman voice. And then, without any change of tone, without any seam, in the very middle of the woman crying, it slid into the man-drowning voice from the lake. "Help, please, somebody." And then back to the woman, all in one breath, one throat, two people. And I turned and I walked back down that draw, and I did not run because I somehow understood that running was the thing it was waiting for. And I kept my eyes soft and forward, and I put one boot in front of the other all the way back to the route, while the two voices behind me climbed over each other and called and called. I found the real woman an hour later downstream in the last of the light. She was alive. She was curled in the roots of a blown-down cedar with her jacket over her head and her hands pressed over her own ears. And when I touched her shoulder, she came up swinging, and it took me a long time to make her understand that I was a man and not a voice. Her name was Naya. Her partner, Dana, had gone off 2 nights before to find the sound of her sister calling for help. Her sister, who was 300 miles away and safe in her own kitchen. And Dana had not come back, and Nia had been sitting in those roots with her ears covered ever since, because every hour or so, she told me, shaking, her voice a raw whisper, every hour or so it comes and stands out there in the trees, and it calls me in Dana voice. And once, she said, and here she looked at me with an expression I have tried and failed to forget, once it called me in my own. I got Nia back to the boat and back to the cabin by full night. I do not like to think about that walk out. We went the long way, along the shore, in the open where I could see the water on one side, and the whole way something kept pace with us in the tree line, unhurried, matching us, and twice it called, once in Dana voice and once in a voice I did not know, a child voice, thin and sweet. And Nia made a sound each time like she had been struck, and I held her arm and kept her walking, and did not let her stop, and did not answer, and did not look into the trees. In the cabin, I got the stove roaring, and I got hot food into her, and I wrapped her, and I put her in my own bunk. and she slept the way the truly spent sleep, hard and sudden, mid-sentence. I sat up at the desk with the shotgun across my knees, which I know does nothing, and I opened the green book to the entries I had skimmed and not believed, and I read them again as a man who now believed every word. It was all there. 50 years of it. The quiet comes first, one ranger had written in the 60s. The animals stand wrong. Then it takes the water at night. Then it takes the woods. It learns a new voice every few years, and it never forgets the old ones. So a man who has been here long enough hears his whole life calling him from the trees. And then, underlined 3 times, a warning I had read as poetry the first night, and understood now as instruction. It cannot come inside. It cannot open a door or a window. It cannot cross a threshold you have not invited it across. All it has is your ears and your own heart working against you. Keep the door shut. Do not answer. Do not go out. Wait for the sun. It hates the birds, and it leaves when they return. And near the back, Gideon Ross, Year of Silence, explained at last, in an entry he must have written long after the fact, in a hand that shook. My partner that season was a young ranger named Danny. Danny had been at Naskeag 4 months. He was good and steady, and he did not believe the book any more than I had. One night, in his 4th month, the voice on the water called Danny Mother, who was living, and Danny sat up in his bunk and said, "That is my mother," and I told him it was not, and I held his arm the way you are supposed to. And in the small hours while I finally slept, it called him again, and this time, Gideon wrote, it called him in my voice. It called him in mine. It said, "Danny, come out and help me. I have fallen on the dock." And Danny, who trusted me, who would have done anything I asked, got up and opened the door and walked down to the dock in his socks, and I woke to the door standing open and the cold coming in, and I ran down to the water, and there was no one there at all. No Danny, no tracks past the middle of the dock, nothing on the water. The book was right. It learns your voice last. That is the one it takes people with. I closed the book. The fire snapped. Naya breathed slow and deep in my bunk. And out on the Black Lake, right on schedule, a little after 2, the voice began to call. It called help. It called please. It called Dana. And it called Naya in Dana voice, low so as not to wake me, coaxing. And I sat with my hand on the shotgun and did not move and watched Naya to be sure she did not stir. She did not. And then the voice on the water stopped calling the names of strangers, and it was quiet for a long moment. The longest and worst moment, and then it said gently, patiently, in a voice I had not heard in over 3 years, but would have known at the bottom of the sea, in my dead brother Jonah voice, it said, "Elan, Elan, it is me. I am so cold. Please come get me. You said you would come get me. I have told you that I came to Naskeag running from that lake in the south, and the arm I told myself was a wave. So you will understand what it cost me to sit in that chair. The thing on the water had reached down into the deepest room in me and found the one voice I had spent 2 years dying to hear one more time. And it played that voice back to me across the black water, warm and near and pleading, saying the exact thing I would have given my own life to be able to answer. Elan, you said you would come. I stood up. I want you to know that I stood up, and I put my hand on the door latch. And then Nia, asleep, made a small sound in my bunk, a living human sound. And it broke the surface of me. And I took my hand off the latch, and I sat back down, and I began very quietly to weep. And I did not go, and I did not answer, and I said to the closed door, not to Jonah, because it was not Jonah, I said, "You are not him." And the voice on the water fell silent, and did not speak again, and the birds came back a little after dawn. The float plane took Naya out the next afternoon. She would not go near the shore until the pilot was on the dock with his hand out. She hugged me before she climbed in, a hard, fast hug like a person grabbing a rail, and she said into my collar, "Do not stay here." And then she was gone over the tree line, and I was alone at Nasky again, with the whole thing still living in the woods behind me. We never found Dana. The official search, staged out of a town 3 hours away, ran for 9 days and turned up his pack, hung neatly in a tree a mile from where he had last been seen, and one boot on the shore of the northwest arm at the edge of the water, and nothing else. No tracks past the middle of any soft ground. They wrote it up as a drowning, or a fall, or an exposure death. Some clean word that lets the paperwork close and lets the family have a stone to visit. I signed what they put in front of me. There was no other word I could have given them that would not have gotten me removed from that station and put somewhere with soft walls, and by then, and I have thought hard about why, I did not want to leave. I did not want to leave because of the last thing that happened. On the final night before the search teams came in, and the woods filled up with people and radios, and the thing went quiet and deep the way it does when the birds are thick. And I have never told anyone this part. And I am telling you now because you are far away and cannot come here. That last night, alone again, I did something the book warns against, and the rangers before me were too wise to do. I went out onto the dock, not to answer it. And I need you to understand that I did not answer it. But I walked to the very end of the dock in the cold, over the black water, and I stood there, and I said out loud, into the silence over the lake, I said, "I know you are not him. I know what you are. But you have his voice now, and it is the only place his voice still exists in the whole world. And I am asking you, just once, to say my name again in it. Not to call me out, not to take me, just to say it, so I can hear him one more time, and then let him go." For a long while, the lake gave me nothing. The water was flat, and the stars were hard, and the forest stood black on every shore. And then, from far out, very softly, without any pleading in it this time, without any hook almost, I would swear to you, almost gently, the water said, in my brother voice, "Elan." Only that. Only my name. Once. The way he used to say it when we were boys, and he wanted me to come see something he had found. And then it was quiet, and it stayed quiet, and I stood on the dock, and I let 2 years of held water come up out of me. And when it was done, I said, "Thank you," and I said, "Goodbye." And I meant it for Jonah, and not for the thing, and I walked back up the dock, and I went inside, and I shut the door. I have been at Nasky 6 years now. The birds still stop sometimes, and when they do, I go inside, and I shut the door, and I wait for the sun, and it always comes. The doe with the wrong legs has come to the clearing 4 times that I have counted, and I no longer go out to haze her off. Twice more I have had to find lost people, and twice I have gotten them out. And both times, something walked the tree line beside us, calling in the voices of everyone those people had ever loved. And both times, I kept them walking and did not answer and did not look. And both times on the boat, they asked me how I could stand it, how I could hear my own dead calling me and not turn my head, and both times I told them the truth, which is that I already turned my head once on a friendly lake in the south on an ordinary afternoon, and I told myself it was a wave, and I have spent every day since learning exactly how much a man loses when he answers the water too late or answers it at all. I keep the green book. I have added my own pages to it now in my own hand. The quiet, the animals, the water, the names, and the one rule under all the others that took me the longest and the most to learn, and that I will leave for whoever comes to Nasky after me. It is this: The thing in these woods is not a monster out of a story. It does not have claws. It never touched me. It has only ever had one weapon, and the weapon is the sound of the people we could not save, played back to us in the night, close enough to reach, asking us to do the one thing our grief has been begging us to do since the day we failed them, which is to get up and open the door and go out onto the black water and finally bring them home. Do not answer the water, no matter whose voice it is, especially when it is right. Story 3. My grandmother named me Tokala, which in the old tongue means fox, because I was born in the season when the foxes came down out of the high country to hunt the edges of our valley. She said a fox knows two things better than any other animal. It knows how to listen, and it knows when to run. I have carried that name my whole life, and for 31 years I believed I understood it. I was wrong about the second half. I did not learn the running part until Cold Harbor. I took the ranger post in the Selkirk backcountry of northern Idaho in the last week of September, when most sensible people were coming out of the mountains and I was going in. There is a reason the Forest Service could not keep anyone in the Cold Harbor station for more than a single season, and it is not the one they printed in the job listing. The listing said, remote posting, primitive conditions, seasonal isolation. It did not say that the last 4 rangers had all requested transfers before the snow closed the road. It did not say that one of them had left in the middle of the night on foot, 22 miles to the trailhead, and would not talk about why. I want to be honest with you about the reason I accepted, because everything that came after grew out of that reason, like a plant grows out of a seed, and you should understand the shape of the seed. I accepted because I was hiding. 8 months before, I had been the ranger who signed off on a search that got called too early. A family of 3 went up a day-use trail in the Cascades and did not come back, and I was the one who read the weather, read the terrain, and told the incident commander that they had almost certainly walked out a different trailhead and would turn up by morning. They did not turn up by morning. We found the father in April when the snow gave him back. I do not say this to make you feel sorry for me. I say it so you know that when the Cold Harbor post came open, the isolation was not a hardship I was tolerating. It was the whole appeal. I wanted to go somewhere so far from other human beings that I could never again make a decision that killed one of them. The road in was 18 miles of washboard and blowdown, and the last 4 miles I had to clear by hand with a chainsaw the district gave me. When I came over the final rise and saw Cold Harbor Lake for the first time, I stopped the truck and just looked at it. The lake sat in a bowl of gray granite and black timber, maybe a mile long, and the water was the flat, still color of an old mirror that has stopped showing anything. On the near shore stood the cabin, a squat log building with a green metal roof and a stovepipe, and a dock that reached out into the water on legs gone soft with rot. Behind the cabin, the forest climbed straight up the mountain until it stopped being individual trees and became one dark wall. It was beautiful. I want that on the record. Before it was anything else, it was beautiful. And part of me relaxed the moment I saw it. The way you relax when you finally reach a place where nobody knows your name. I moved in that first afternoon. The cabin had 2 rooms, a wood stove that drew well, a hand pump for water, and a radio that could reach the district office only in the early morning when the air was cold and the signal carried. There was a logbook on the desk, a hardbound green ledger, and the ranger before me had kept it faithfully until the middle of August, when the entries simply stopped. The last several pages were still in the same steady handwriting, and I read them by lantern light while my dinner heated on the stove. Most of it was ordinary, water levels, wildlife counts, a bear that had gotten into a food cache at the Nine Bark campsite. Then in the second week of August, the tone of the writing changed. Not the handwriting, the tone. August 9th. Heard someone calling from across the lake around 2100. Sound carried strange. Could not make out words. No overnight permits issued. Investigated shore in morning, found nothing. August 11th. Voice again after dark. This time I heard my own name, clear. Twice. I did not answer. August 14th, it is getting the sounds right now. Tonight it did the sound of a person coughing, then a woman saying help, then a child. There are no women or children within 20 miles of me. August 15th, do not answer it. Whatever else you do out here, do not answer it. I am writing this down so that whoever reads it after me does not have to learn the way I learned. There was one more entry, dated 3 days later, and it was a single line. August 18th. It knows I stopped answering, so now it is coming closer. The rest of the ledger was blank. I sat with the lantern hissing and the stove ticking, and I told myself what a reasonable person tells himself, that the previous ranger had spent too long alone. That isolation does strange things to the human ear, that the mind is a machine built to find voices and faces and noise, and that a man 20 miles from the nearest road will eventually hear his own name in the wind because he wants so badly to hear it. I had studied the psychology of solitude before I took the post. I knew about the auditory illusions, the way the brain fills silence with pattern. I believed all of it. I want you to know that I believed all of it, right up until the third night. The first 2 nights at Cold Harbor were silent, and I slept better than I had in months. There is a particular quiet in high country that has weight to it. It is not the absence of sound. It is a presence made of small sounds arranged around a great stillness, the lap of the lake, the settling of the timber, the far cry of a loon out on the water at dusk. I stood on the rotting dock those first evenings and let it move through me. And for the first time since the Cascades, I did not lie awake replaying a decision. The mountain did not care what I had done. That was the gift of the place. That was what I had come for. On the third night, a little after 10, I was banking the stove for the night when I heard someone say my name, Tokala. It came from out on the water or from the far shore. It was hard to place. A man's voice, low and clear, carrying across the flat surface of the lake the way sound carries over water on a still night. I froze with the poker in my hand. I did not breathe. I told myself it was a loon. Loons make sounds that people mistake for human calls all the time, and I had heard one that very evening. Then it came again, Tokala, and then patiently, as though the speaker had all the time in the world, a single word, help. I went to the window. The moon was up and the lake lay under it like a sheet of pewter, and I could see the whole near shore and most of the far one, and there was nobody there. No boat, no light, no figure standing at the tree line. Only the water and the black wall of timber and my own face reflected faintly in the cold glass. I did not answer. I do not know why I did not answer, except that the previous ranger's handwriting was still fresh in my mind, and something older than reason had closed my throat. I stood at the window for a long time. The voice called 4 more times, always my name and then the word help, and each time it came from a slightly different place along the shore, moving slowly to my left, as if whatever was making it were walking the water's edge and calling as it went. Then it stopped, and the loon called once, real and unmistakable, and completely different from the thing I had been listening to, and I understood that I had never once mistaken a bird. I did not sleep. I sat up against the wall with the lantern lit and the shotgun across my knees, which was foolish because you cannot shoot a sound. And by the gray of dawn, I had built myself a comfortable explanation. Sound carries strangely over water. Hunters sometimes camped illegally in the drainages to the north. A man could have been genuinely lost, and I, primed by that ledger, had let a stranger in real distress call for help while I sat inside like a coward. That thought was worse than the fear, and I clung to it, because a man who might have failed someone is a shape I knew how to be. It was familiar. It fit me like an old coat. At first light, I took the canoe out and paddled the entire shoreline. I am a trained tracker. I have found people in country that swallow sign whole. I went slowly, reading the mud and the gravel and the soft ground under the alders where anyone walking the shore would have left a mark. There were no human tracks anywhere along that lake. There were tracks, though. In the black mud at the north end, where a creek came down out of the timber, I found a set of prints in the soft ground, and I crouched over them for a long time, trying to make them into something I recognized. They were not a bear. A bear leaves a print you can read like a signature. The wide pad, the claw marks, the pigeon-toed roll of the walk. These were longer than a bear's hind foot and narrower, and the toes, if they were toes, were too long, and the whole print sank deep at the front, as though the weight came down there, on the front of the foot, the way weight comes down when something walks bent forward. There were only two of them. Two prints, side by side, at the exact edge of the water, facing the lake, facing the cabin. And then nothing. No trail leading to them. No trail leading away. As though whatever had stood there had been set down out of the air to look across the water at my window and then lifted away again. I told myself it was a bear, after all, some strange overlapping of prints, some trick of the mud. I photographed them for the district. I paddled back, and that night, a little after 10, the voice came again, and this time, it did not just call my name. This time, it called in my grandmother's voice. She had been dead for 19 years. And the thing across the water called Tukala in the exact cadence she used to use when she wanted me to come inside before the cold set in. The small rising note on the second syllable that no living person alive still remembered, that existed nowhere in the world except inside my own memory. I stood at the window with my whole body gone cold, and I understood something that the reasonable part of me spent the rest of the night trying to unlearn. It was not making sounds and hoping. It was reaching into me and taking out the one voice I would want, above all others, to answer. 4 days later, 2 hikers came down the trail from the north, and for a few hours I let myself believe I had been going quietly insane and that ordinary human company would set me right. They were a young couple, well-equipped, doing a loop through the high lakes before the snow closed the passes. The man was tall and easy, the woman quick and watchful, and they had a permit and a good map, and the kind of confidence that comes from having done hard trips together and come out fine. I made them coffee on the wood stove, and we sat on the dock in the thin autumn sun, and they told me about the country to the north, the passes, the last of the huckleberries. I did not tell them about the voice. What would I have said? I was a federal officer alone in the backcountry, and the first thing out of my mouth was going to be that a dead woman called to me across the lake at night. I let it go. I let them think I was only lonely, which was true, and only glad of company, which was also true. They asked if they could camp at the Nine Bark site, half a mile up the eastern shore, and I said yes, and I walked them up there in the afternoon and checked their bear hang and reminded them to keep a clean camp. And everything about it was so ordinary and so good that I walked back to the cabin lighter than I had felt in weeks. Real people, real voices coming out of real mouths attached to real lives. It was medicine. That night, the voice did not call for me. That night, a little after 10, I heard it call from the direction of the Ninebark site. And it called in the woman's voice, the hiker, clear and rising and afraid. Help, please, somebody help. I was out the door with the shotgun and the big flashlight before I had finished thinking. I ran the shore trail in the dark with the beam jumping ahead of me, and the whole way the voice kept calling, always from ahead of me, always the woman, always help. And I was most of the way to their camp, for the fox in me, the part my grandmother named, put its ears up and made me stop. The voice was calling from ahead of me, up the trail, deeper into the timber. But the Ninebark site was below me now, down at the water. I had already passed the turn. Whatever was calling in the woman's voice was leading me away from the campsite, up the mountain, into the black. I stood on the trail with my heart going, and I made myself do the hardest thing I have ever done. I stopped following the voice, and I turned around, and I went down to the camp instead. They were both asleep in their tent, alive, fine. I woke them, which frightened them badly, a ranger crashing into their camp at midnight with a shotgun. And I could not fully explain myself, and I am sure that for the rest of their lives, they will tell the story of the strange, lonely ranger at Cold Harbor who lost his composure in the night. But I got them to promise me one thing, and I said it 3 times so it would hold. If you hear anyone calling for help in the dark, I told them, you do not answer and you do not go. No matter whose voice it is, you stay in this tent and you wait for the sun. They left the next morning early, and I did not try to stop them. And I watched them go up the trail with something close to grief, because they were the last human beings I would see for a long time. And because up the trail was the same direction the voice had tried to take me. I stood on the dock until they were out of sight, and then for a long while after, and the lake lay flat and gray and patient. And I understood that the thing across the water had learned something new about me that night. It had learned that I would not come for myself, but I had come running for a stranger. It had watched me do it. It had watched me run half a mile in the dark the moment I believed someone else was in danger, and it had filed that away, the way I would file away sign in the mud. And I knew with a certainty I could not have defended to any court or any doctor at the district office that it would use it. That was the shape of the thing. It did not want to lure me with fear. It had tried fear, and I had turned around. Now it knew that the way to me was not through what I was afraid of. The way to me was through what I could not forgive myself for. The way to me was a voice calling for help that I chose not to save. The nights got longer and colder, and the thing across the lake got better. I stopped calling it a voice, even in my own head, because a voice is a small thing, and this was not small. I started calling it the caller. The caller learned. That is the part I most need you to understand, because it is the part that reasonable people cannot sit with. It was not a recording. It was not a creature with a fixed set of sounds. It listened to me the way I listened to it, and it studied me, and it got better at the one thing it did, which was to find the exact voice that I would be least able to ignore, and to put that voice in the dark, and to wait. After the hikers, it began to call for help in voices I had never heard but immediately understood. A child. Always the same child, a boy of maybe 6, and always the same words, said in a rising panic that got worse the longer I did not answer. I cannot find my dad. I cannot find my dad. Please, is anybody there? And I would sit in the cabin with my hands over my ears because I knew there was no child. There had never been a child. There was no possible way a 6-year-old boy could be alone on the shore of Cold Harbor Lake in October, 22 miles from the nearest road. And knowing it did not help. because the family in the Cascades had a boy. He was 7 when we called off the search. And the caller had reached into me again and found the exact wound and pressed its thumb into it, and asked me in the voice of a lost child why I was not coming. I stopped sleeping in any real way. I would go under for an hour or two in the gray afternoons when the thing seemed to sleep too or to withdraw, and at night I sat up with the lantern and the stove, and I did not answer. I want to tell you about the closest it came because that is the night everything turned. It was late October and the first hard freeze had come, and the lake at the edges had begun to skin over with ice. I was at the window where I spent most of my nights now, watching the moon on the water. And a little after 10, the caller began, but it did not begin from across the lake. It began from the dock, right outside, 30 feet from where I stood. Close enough that I should have been able to see whatever was making it, and there was nothing on the dock but frost and moonlight. And it called in my own voice. I had never heard the caller use my own voice before. It had used my grandmother and the hiker and the child, but never me. And there is no way I can make you feel what it is to stand alone in a cabin in the dark and hear your own voice, your exact voice, every catch and weight of it, speaking from the dock outside, calm and reasonable and warm. "Tokala," it said in my voice. "It is all right. You can open the door. It is only me. You have been alone so long, you do not have to be alone. Come out. Come out and see." And here's the thing I have not told anyone until now. For one moment, one single moment, I wanted to. Not because I was tricked. I knew exactly what it was. I wanted to open the door because I was so tired and so alone, and the voice was so kind, and it was my own voice telling me that the being alone could stop. It had found the last door in me. Not fear, not guilt. The plain animal loneliness of a man who had gone into the wilderness to be punished and had gotten the punishment, and now, at the bottom of it, only wanted to not be by himself in the dark anymore. My hand was on the latch. I do not remember deciding to put it there. What saved me was a small thing, and it was my grandmother again. Though not the caller's version of her. It was the real one. The memory of her, surfacing on its own. "A fox knows 2 things," she used to say. "It knows how to listen, and it knows when to run." And I realized, with my hand on the latch and my own kind voice coaxing me from the frozen dock, that I had done nothing but listen since the day I arrived. I had listened and told myself that listening carefully enough would make the danger into something I could understand. Something I could file and photograph and explain to the district. I had been the fox that only ever does the first thing. And the first thing was not going to save me. The mountain did not care whether I understood it. It only cared whether I stayed. I took my hand off the latch, and I said the first words I had spoken aloud to the caller in 5 weeks. I did not answer its question. I only said out loud, steady so I would believe it, "No." And I stepped back from the door. On the dock, my own voice stopped being kind. It did not shout. It did something worse. It sighed, the small, tired sigh I make when I am disappointed, my own exact sigh. And then it was quiet, and then very softly, from right against the other side of the door, close as a person leaning their forehead on the wood, it said, in my voice, "One last thing. All right. Then I will wait. I have all winter." And I understood that the road was already closing behind me with the snow, and that it was right. The morning after the caller stood on my dock, I got the district office on the radio in the cold, clear window just after dawn, and I told them I was requesting an emergency extraction, and I gave them the only reason I could give that would make them send a helicopter for a healthy man. I told them my mental health had failed and that I was no longer safe to be alone in the backcountry. I want to be clear that this was not a lie. By any measure a doctor would use, it was true, but it was not the reason. The reason was that I had finally understood my own name. I knew how to listen. Now I had to know when to run, and the fox does not wait until it can prove to anyone else that the danger is real. It runs while it still can. The district said the earliest they could get a bird in was 36 hours out, weather permitting. Weather did not look like it would permit. A system was coming in off the coast that would drop 2 feet of snow on the Selkirks and close the whole range to flying for who knew how long. 36 hours, 2 more nights. And I did not think I had 2 more nights because the caller had told me it would wait all winter, and I believed it. And I did not think I could sit at that window 2 more times and say no with my own voice pleading me by the loneliness toward the door. So I chose the other thing my name knows. I chose to run. 22 miles to the trailhead, on foot. With the storm coming, in late October in the Selkirks, alone. Every rule I had ever taught a hiker said, do not do this. Stay put. Shelter in place. Let them come to you. And every rule was right. For every danger that was real in the ordinary world. But the ordinary world had let go of Cold Harbor sometime in September, and I was not sheltering in place with the thing that waited on my dock. I packed light and fast. Water, a little food, a headlamp. The map I did not need because I had walked the road in and could walk it out. I left the shotgun. You cannot shoot a sound. I left at first light, and I did not look back at the lake, because I did not want to see whether anything was standing on the frozen edge of it, watching me go. The first 12 miles were only cold and hard and ordinary, and I made good time on the road. I had cleared myself coming in, and for a while, I let myself hope that the caller was bound to the lake, that whatever it was could not follow the water out of its own country, that I was simply walking away from it into the plain gray world, where my worst problem was the storm at my back. Then, in the last light of the afternoon, with maybe 8 miles to go and the first snow starting to come down through the timber in slow feathers, I heard it call from ahead of me on the road. The child's voice. I cannot find my dad. Please, is anybody there? From ahead of me. Between me and the trailhead. Between me and out. I stopped in the road with the snow coming down, and I understood that it had gotten ahead of me, or that it had never been in the lake at all, or that it was in the whole mountain and always had been, and that the last 8 miles were going to be a walk through country that had a voice, and the voice was going to spend those 8 miles doing the only thing it did, which was to find the exact reason I could not keep walking, and to put it in the road ahead of me, and to wait for me to come. I want to tell you that I was brave. I was not brave. I put my head down, and I made myself into an animal that does not listen. And I walked into my own worst voices for 8 miles in the dark and the deepening snow. The child called for its father, and I walked through it. My grandmother called my name in the cadence no living person remembered, and I walked through it. And in the last 2 miles, when it must have understood that fear and guilt and grief were not going to stop me, it used my own voice one final time, and my own voice, kind and tired and reasonable, walked beside me in the dark just off the road and told me it was all right to sit down just for a minute, just to rest, that I was so tired, that I did not have to keep going, that I could stop now and it would sit with me, so I would not be alone. And that was the one that almost took me. Not the child, not the dead. The permission to stop. The company at the end of it. I got down on one knee in the snow with my own voice telling me it was all right, and the fox in me, the last of it, put its ears up one more time and made me hear what my own voice was really saying underneath the kindness. It was saying, stay. Everything it had ever said, in every voice, had only ever meant the one thing. Stay. Stay here. Stay with me. Do not run. I got up. I do not know how. I got up, and I ran the last 2 miles, and I did not stop. And the voice ran alongside me the whole way. Still kind, still patient, still mine. Right up until I came around the last bend and saw the little gravel lot of the trailhead and the one sodium light on its pole burning orange through the snow, and my truck where I had left it 5 weeks before, and the plowed county road beyond it going down out of the mountains into the ordinary world. And at the edge of the trees where the wilderness ended and the gravel began, the voice stopped. It did not follow me into the light. Whatever it was, it belonged to the deep country, and the deep country ended at that line of trees. And it stood there at the boundary of its own place, and it did not come out. And the last thing I ever heard from it, as I reached my truck with my hands shaking too hard to hold the keys, was my own voice. From the tree line, very quiet, saying only my name. Tokala. Not calling me back, just saying it. The way you say the name of something you are letting go of. The way you say the name of something you expect to see again. I got in the truck and I drove down out of the Selkirks through the snow, and I did not stop until I was in a lit town with other human beings in it. And I sat in an all-night diner until the sun came up, and a waitress with a real voice out of a real mouth asked me if I was all right, and I said no, and it was the truest thing I had said in 5 weeks. I never went back to Cold Harbor. The station is closed now. They could not keep anyone in it. And after my report, which I wrote as carefully and as clinically as I could, they stopped trying. The road has grown back in. The cabin is probably still there on the shore of that flat gray lake. And the green ledger is probably still on the desk where I left it, with my own entries added after the last ranger's ending the same way his did. I have thought a great deal about what it was, and I have decided that the naming of it does not matter, and that the naming is a trap, because the naming is only listening dressed up as understanding, and I have done enough listening to last me the rest of my life. I do not know what waits on the shore of Cold Harbor Lake. I know only what my grandmother knew, and what she gave me when she gave me my name. A fox knows 2 things. It knows how to listen, and it knows when to run. I listened for 5 weeks, and then, at the very end, with my own kind voice begging me to stay, I finally learned the second thing. If you are ever in the deep country, far from any road, and the dark calls to you in a voice you love, in the voice of someone you have lost, in your own voice telling you that you do not have to be alone, I am going to tell you the one thing the ranger before me tried to tell me. The one thing I am still alive to pass on. Do not answer it. And when you understand that it has learned this about you, that it knows the shape of the wound you would open the door for, do not sit at the window and try to understand it. Run, while you still can. Run. Story 4. People ask me why I took a job that keeps me 60 miles from the nearest paved road, and I never give them the honest answer, because the honest answer makes them look at me the way you look at a man who has already decided something about himself. The truth is that I wanted to be somewhere a phone could not follow me. Before the wilderness, I spent 11 years measuring other people's grief for an insurance firm in Spokane. I sat in a beige office and put numbers on the worst days of strangers' lives. And one winter, I stopped being able to sleep. And then I stopped being able to eat lunch without my hand shaking. And then my wife left, and I did not blame her, because I had already left in every way that counts, except the physical one. When the notice came that the Forest Service was hiring a backcountry ranger for the Nikita district, I read it 4 times. I did not care about the pay. I cared that the description said the station had no cellular coverage, no reliable radio past the ridge, and a mandatory season of solitude from May to October. I applied that same night. I think I applied the way a drowning man reaches for anything that floats. Nakita is an old word. The man who trained me, a district veteran named Wallace Wren, told me it came from the Salish and meant something close to wolf, though he admitted he had heard 3 other meanings over the years and did not trust any of them. The station sits at the northern edge of a basin that the maps still label as unsurveyed in 2 places, which is a thing most people do not believe still exists in this country. There is a lake there, Tumtum Lake, black as a well and shaped like a bent finger, ringed by cedar and hemlock so old that some of the trunks are wider than my truck. And on the western shore, on a shelf of granite about 40 feet above the water, there is the cabin. The cabin is where I have lived for 2 seasons now. I want to describe it plainly because later I will describe things that are not plain, and I need you to trust the plainness first. It is a single room of squared logs, chinked with a gray mortar that the last ranger mixed himself. There is a wood stove, a cot, a small table, a shelf of field guides warped by damp, a radio that works when the weather is kind and lies when it is not, a generator I run 2 hours a day, a porch that faces the lake where I drink my coffee in the morning and watch the mist peel off the water in long, slow ribbons. The nearest human being in summer is a lookout named Perry O'Say, who mans a fire tower 9 miles southeast on Cutbank Ridge, and even he is only there when the fire danger climbs. My work is simple to list and hard to do. I clear trail, I check permits, I count the elk and the goats, and when someone gets lost, which happens more than the brochures admit, I go find them. I found my first person in my 2nd week, a college kid from Portland who had walked off a switchback in fog and spent a night curled under a deadfall, certain he was going to die. And when I came up the draw calling his name, he wept so hard he could not stand. I carried his pack the 4 miles out, and I felt, for the first time in years, like a man who was in the right place. That feeling is a drug. I want to be honest about that because I think the wanting is part of what kept me in the basin longer than I should have stayed. Wallace Wren gave me one warning before he retired, and at the time I filed it under the harmless superstition that old woodsmen collect the way other men collect stamps. We were sitting on the porch and the light was going amber over the far ridge, and he was quiet for a long while, and then he said without turning to look at me, that if I ever heard someone calling for help out on the water at night, I was not to answer. I laughed. I asked him what he meant. He said he did not know how to mean it any plainer than he had said it. He said the lake carries voices in a way that is not natural, and that a smart ranger keeps his door shut and his stove hot and does not go down to the shore after sunset for any reason at all. Then he changed the subject, and we never spoke of it again. And 3 days later, he drove out of the basin for good and left me the keys. I did not think about that warning for a long time. There was too much to do. The first summer passed in sweat and blisters and the good, honest exhaustion I had come there to find. I slept. I ate. My hands stopped shaking. I told myself I had healed, and maybe I had in the small, ordinary ways a body heals when you take it out of a beige office and set it down under 10,000 acres of sky. It was the second summer that things began to go wrong, and they began so quietly that I mistook the first signs for peace. It started with the birds. There are ravens in the basin, big ones, and they are loud and clever, and they had learned my routine, hanging around the station in the mornings for the scraps I left out. Then in the late June of that 2nd year, they went silent. Not gone. Silent. I would see them in the cedars, 6 or 7 at a time, sitting motionless, watching the lake, and they would not call, and they would not fly. And when I clapped my hands, they only turned their heads toward me, and then back toward the water, as if I were the less interesting thing. A basin that had been full of noise, woodpeckers and jays and the evening chorus of frogs, grew hushed by the middle of July. I told myself it was the heat. I told myself a lot of things that summer. Then came the night I first heard it, and I want to set that down carefully, because that is where the ordinary part of my life ends. It was a warm night with no moon. I had the door open for the air. I was reading by lamplight with the lake a sheet of black glass below the porch, and out of that blackness, from somewhere near the middle of the water, I heard a woman call out. She called, "Hello." She called it the way you call into a house you think is empty. "Hello, is anyone there?" I sat very still. My first thought was practical and cold. The thought of a man whose job is other people's emergencies. Someone is on the lake at night. Someone is in trouble. I stood up, and I got as far as the doorway, and then I remembered Wallace Wren on this same porch telling me not to answer, and I stopped with one hand on the frame. The voice called again. It was closer now, and it was calling my name. Here is the thing that stopped me in the doorway, and it is a thing I have turned over in my mind on a great many sleepless nights since. Nobody in the basin knew my name. I had been in Nakita alone for 6 weeks. Perry O'Say on the fire tower called me Ranger over the radio, out of a kind of formal courtesy we both enjoyed. The permits I checked bore other people's names, not mine. There was no reason on earth for a voice on that black water to know that I was Elias, and yet it called it. And it called it in a woman's tone that was gentle and a little tired. The way you might say the name of a man you loved and were worried about. Elias. Elias, come down. I did not go down. I want that on the record because I have wondered since whether the going down was ever really a choice or only a delay. I stepped back inside, and I shut the door, and I dropped the bar, which I had never once used. And I sat on my cot with my back to the logs, and I listened to that voice call my name for the better part of an hour, moving slowly along the shoreline below the cabin, patient as tide. Toward dawn, it stopped. When the light came gray over the ridge, I went out, and I walked the whole shore, and found nothing. No boat, no tracks in the mud, but the delicate prints of a doe. And I told myself the sensible thing, which is that sound travels strangely over water, and that a lost hiker on the far shore must have found my name on a trail register somewhere, and that I would locate her in daylight and feel foolish. I did not feel foolish for long. 2 days later, the call came in that turned my strange night into something I could not file away. A party of 4 had gone into the basin from the Cut Bank trailhead, day hikers, and only 3 had come out. The missing man was named Owen Delacroix, 41, from Coeur d'Alene, and his companion said he had lagged behind on the descent to photograph the lake and simply had not caught up, and when they backtracked, they could not find him, and their phones were useless past the ridge, so they drove out to the nearest landline and reported him gone. I logged the report at 4 in the afternoon, and I was on the trail within the hour, because the first hours are the ones that matter, and I have carried enough people out and covered enough people up to know the difference the light makes. I searched the descent grid the way I was trained, in expanding arcs, calling his name. Owen Delacroix. My own voice came back to me off the rock faces, thinned and doubled. The evening was very still. Those silent ravens sat in the high cedars and watched me work, turning their heads to follow me down the slope. And I remember thinking that it was unnatural for so many of them to gather and make no sound. And I remember pushing the thought away because I had a man to find. I found his camera first. It was lying in the ferns 30 yards off the trail, lens down, the strap unbroken, as if he had set it there rather than dropped it. The last image on the card, when I checked it later, was a photograph of the lake at dusk with something on the far shore that the low light had rendered as a pale vertical smear, too tall and too thin, which I told myself was a snag, a dead-standing trunk, because that is what it most likely was. I found Owen an hour after that, and he was alive, and I have never in my life been so unhappy to find a man alive. He was sitting at the foot of a cedar half a mile off any trail in a direction that made no sense, deeper into the basin instead of out of it. And he was facing the lake, and he was talking. I heard him before I saw him. He was carrying on a low, steady conversation with someone, and his voice was warm and easy, the voice of a man talking with an old friend on a porch. And when I came around the tree, there was no one there. He did not startle. He turned his head to me slowly, and he smiled, and he said, in a puzzled and pleasant way, that his daughter had come out to meet him, and had just this minute stepped down to the water, and would I mind waiting until she came back up. Owen Delacroix did not have a daughter. His hiking companions confirmed it. He had never married, but he had told me in that half mile I spent coaxing him back from the shore all about her, her name, the gap in her front teeth, the way she called him from the tree line. He said she had been calling him for 2 hours, and he could not understand why I had not heard her, because she was right there. She was so close. And did I not hear her calling him just now, calling him to come down to the water where she was waiting? I got him out. It took until well past midnight. He grew agitated as we climbed away from the lake, straining back toward the water, and twice I had to physically turn him. And each time I touched his shoulder, he flinched as though I had woken him. By the trailhead, he was mostly himself again, exhausted and confused and ashamed. And he remembered almost nothing after setting down his camera. He asked me what had happened. I told him he had gotten turned around in the dusk. It was the kindest lie I had. I did not tell him that as we came up out of the basin, with him leaning on me and the black lake falling away below us. I had heard a young girl's voice come rolling up off the water behind us, calling one word over and over, calling Daddy, and that I had felt Owen Delacroix go rigid under my hands, and that I had put my mouth close to his ear and said, "Do not answer," and had half carried, half dragged him the rest of the way, while the voice followed us up the slope until the trees closed the sound off like a door. I filed Owen under exposure and disorientation. That is what the report says. I did not know what else to write, and I did not have a word yet for the thing I was beginning to understand, which was that whatever was in the basin did not simply make voices. It listened. It learned what a man wanted, and then it became the shape of that want, and it called him down to the water. After Owen Delacroix, I started keeping a log that was not the official log, a second notebook, private, where I wrote down the things I could not put in the report because they would have gotten me pulled from the district and sent to talk to someone about my nerves. I have that notebook in front of me now. The handwriting gets worse as it goes. I wrote down the pattern as I came to see it, and the pattern was this. The voice never came in daylight. It never came from the land. It came off the water, always, and it never asked for what it wanted directly. It offered. It offered a lost man his daughter. It offered a worried man reassurance. It offered me, in the small hours when I was weakest, the one thing I had come to the basin to stop wanting, and I will get to that, but not yet, because I need to tell you about the family first. They came in mid-August, a couple and their 2 children, and they had a permit and good gear, and they knew what they were doing, which is more than I can say for most, and I liked them at once. The father was a lean gray man named Cormac Boyd, who had been coming to the basin since he was a boy, back when the road went in further than it does now. His wife, Deshawn, ran the show with quiet competence. The children were a girl of 10 and a boy of 7. I met them at the trailhead and walked them to the good campsite on the eastern shore, the one on high ground well back from the water, and I did something I had never done with a party before. I told them the lake was dangerous at night. I told them that sound carried strangely, that people had been fooled by it, that they were to keep the children away from the shore after dark, and were not to go toward any voice they heard on the water, no matter what it said or whose it seemed to be. Cormac Boyd looked at me a long moment. Then he nodded slowly, and he said that his grandfather had told him something very similar 60 years before, and that he had always thought it was a story to keep children from drowning. He did not look like a man who thought that anymore. I checked on them the next morning, and they were fine, tired and happy. The children skipping stones under their mother's eye, well back from the deep water as I had asked. I checked on them that evening, and they were fine. I told myself the warning had done its work. They were gone in the night. Not all of them. Cormac Boyd stumbled into my station at first light, soaked to the waist, his hands cut, his face the color of ash, and he could not get the words out for a long time. And when he did, they came in pieces that I had to assemble. In the night, the boy had woken them, saying he could hear a puppy crying down by the shore. A puppy, lost, crying in the reeds. They had told him no, had held him, had done everything I said. But the crying went on, and it was so real, so exactly the sound of a small animal in distress, that around 3 in the morning, the girl, the 10-year-old, the sensible one, had slipped out of the tent while her parents slept to save it. Deshawn woke to find her daughter gone and the tent flap open, and a voice down at the water that was, Cormac told me, unmistakably their daughter's voice, calling that she had found the puppy, calling for her mother to come and see, calling from further and further out. Deshawn went into the lake after her child. Cormac went in after his wife. He told me the water was black and very cold, and that the voices were all around him, his daughter and his wife both, calling from 3 directions at once, and that when he reached the place a voice had come from, there was nothing there. Only the black water and the reeds, and the voices had moved, always just ahead, always just out of reach, drawing him toward the middle of the lake until the cold got into his chest and some animal part of his brain took over and turned him back to shore. He crawled out. He does not remember how. He lay in the mud calling their names until the sky went gray and no one answered but the ravens. We never found them. I called Perry Osei down from the tower and we searched for 9 days, and the county sent a dive team, and they dragged what they could of a lake that has no measured bottom in its center, and we found one of the girl's sandals in the reeds on the far shore, 200 yards from where she went in, which is a distance no current in that still water could have carried it. We found nothing else. The report says probable drowning, mother and daughter, bodies not recovered. It says the father is not a suspect. It does not say what Cormac Boyd said to me on the last day, before he drove out of the basin, a decade older than he had come in. He said the voices had not sounded like it. his wife and daughter drowning. They had sounded happy. They had sounded like they were calling him to come and join something wonderful. And he said the worst part, the part he would carry to his grave, was that for one moment, out there in the black water, he had wanted to. I should have left. I want you to understand that I know I should have left. A reasonable man, after the Boyds, walks out of the basin and hands in his keys and never speaks of the place again. I have asked myself many times why I did not, and the answer I keep arriving at is not one I am proud of. I stayed because it had started to talk to me too, and I wanted to know what it would offer. It had my name by then, of course. It had had my name since that first night. But after the Boyds, it grew bolder, and it began to come most nights, always off the water, always after the light was gone, and it worked at me the way water works at stone, patiently, with all the time in the world. I kept the door barred and the stove hot, as Wallace Wren had told me. I stuffed rags in the gap under the door because I did not want to hear it, and I heard it anyway, low and clear, coming up the granite from the lake. At first it used strangers' voices. It would call for help in the voice of a lost hiker, testing me, seeing if my duty would open the door where my fear would not. When that failed, it grew more personal, and this is the part that is hard to write. It learned me. I do not know how. I have wondered whether a man's wanting leaks out of him somehow into the water, into the air of a place, and whether the thing in the lake drinks it the way roots drink rain. Because one night in September, it stopped using strangers, and it called to me in the voice of my wife, not the wife who left. The wife from before, from the good years before the beige office ate me hollow. It called me by the name she used to call me, a small private name I have not heard spoken in 9 years, and it said the things she used to say when the shaking got bad and she would hold my hand still between hers, and it said she was down at the water and she had come all this way to find me, and would I not come down, just come down to the shore? She only wanted to see me. She had missed me so. I sat with my back to the logs and I wept, and I did not open the door, but I came close. God help me, I came close. My hand was on the bar more than once. What kept me on the cot was a small, cold, clear part of my mind, the same part that had measured other people's grief for 11 years. And it kept repeating the fact I clung to like a spar in deep water, which was that my wife was alive and well and living in Missoula, and that whatever was calling in her voice was not her and had never been her, and only wanted me to open the door and walk down to the Black Lake so that it could do to me whatever it had done to a mother and a girl who went in to save a puppy that was never there. The morning after the worst of those nights, I found the tracks. They came up out of the lake and crossed the mud of the shore and climbed the granite shelf to my cabin, and they stopped at my door, and there were a great many of them, as if something had stood there a long while shifting its weight. They were not the tracks of any animal I know, and I know the tracks of every animal in that basin. They were long and narrow and pressed deep, and they had come out of the water and gone back into the water, and where they turned at my threshold, the mud was scored as though by fingers. I photographed them. The photographs, when I developed them that winter, showed only churned mud. I have looked at them 100 times. Whatever my eyes saw that morning, the film did not. I stopped sleeping after that. I do not mean I slept poorly. I mean that for the last 3 weeks of that season, I did not sleep at all, or so close to it that the distinction stopped mattering. And a man who does not sleep begins to come apart in ways that are hard to describe to someone who has always slept. The basin, which had healed me the first summer, began to unmake me the second. I saw the pale vertical shape at the tree line more than once at dusk, out of the corner of my eye, always gone when I turned. I heard the girl calling Daddy on nights with no one there to call to. And I understood, in the long gray hours before each dawn, that the thing had all the patience in the world, and that I had less of it every day, and that this was a contest I was going to lose if I stayed, because it was not trying to frighten me to death. It was trying to make me want it, and it was very good at its work. I would have gone out. I had decided to go out. I had my pack half loaded on the last night of the season, when the radio crackled and Perry O'Sea's voice came through from the fire tower, thin with static, saying there were lights on the lake. I want to be careful here at the end, because the end is the part I understand least, and the part I most need someone to believe. Perry O'Sea was not a fanciful man. He had spent 9 summers in that tower, and had never once called me for anything but weather and smoke. When he came on the radio that last night, his voice was wrong, high and fast, and he said there were lights moving on Tum Tum Lake, low lights like lanterns, 3 or 4 of them, drifting out from the western shore, and that he could hear voices. That the voices were coming all the way up to the tower 9 miles off, which is not possible, and that one of the voices was mine. I keyed the radio. I told him to stay where he was. I told him not to come down for any reason, that whatever he heard, whatever it sounded like, he was to stay in the tower with the door shut and the light on until sunrise. He said in a small voice that the trouble was that he could hear me down at the lake right now, calling him, telling him to come down and help me, and that if he had not been holding the radio with my real voice coming out of it, he would already be halfway down the trail. That is the closest I have ever come to understanding what it is. It was not just imitating voices heard on the shore. It was somewhere out on that water, making my voice call a man 9 miles away to come down to it, at the very moment I was speaking into the radio. And the only thing that saved Perry O'Sea was the accident of 2 voices, the false one on the wind and the true one on the radio, arriving at the same ear at the same time, so that the seam between them showed. If he had not had the radio, he would have gone. I am as sure of that as I am of anything. I told him to keep the radio keyed, to keep me talking. And I stood in the doorway of my cabin with the handset to my mouth, and I looked down the granite shelf to the lake, and there were lights on the water, pale lights, low, drifting, exactly as he had said. And there were figures. I could not see them well, and I am glad. They stood on the surface of the lake where no one can stand, and there were several of them, and one was small, the size of a child of 10, and they did not move like people move, and they were all facing my cabin, and out of them came a chorus of voices I knew. My wife, the Boyd girl calling Daddy, Owen's phantom daughter, Wallace Wren, who I later learned had died that spring in a hospital in Spokane and could not have been anywhere near that lake. All of them calling me by name. All of them calling me down. I did not go down. I stood in the door with Perry O'Sea's frightened breathing coming out of the radio. And I made myself keep talking to him, describing the weather, reading him the labels off the cans on my shelf, anything. Because as long as I was speaking to a living man, I could not be speaking to them, and as long as I heard his real breath, I could tell the false voices from the true. We talked until the sky went gray. When the light came, the lights on the water thinned and sank and were gone, and the figures with them, and the lake was only a black sheet of glass, with mist coming off it in long, slow ribbons, the most beautiful and ordinary thing you ever saw. I walked out that morning, and I did not go back for the equipment. The Forest Service sent a crew in on the spring to close the station, and I asked to be reassigned, and they gave me a district in the high desert where there is no standing water for 40 miles, and I have been here 2 years, and I sleep now mostly, and my hands are steady mostly. I have thought a great deal about what it was, and I have decided that I do not want a word for it. The people who need words for such things want to make them small enough to hold. and I do not think it can be held or held off, only outlasted, one night at a time, with the door shut. I do not know if it was ever anything at all, or only the shape my own emptiness took when you leave a hollow man alone by black water for 2 summers. I know that Cormac Boyd lost his wife and his daughter, and that the lake gave back one sandal from an impossible distance. I know that Owen Delacroix has a scar on his memory in the shape of a girl who never lived. I know that Perry O'Say will not speak to me, and will not speak of that night, and that when the county closed the file, they wrote drowning and exposure and disorientation, and left me to carry the rest. And I know one more thing, which is why I have written all of this down. Last week in the high desert at the ranger station, where there is no water for 40 miles, I woke a little before dawn to a sound at the door. A small sound, patient, shifting, as of something standing on the step working out how to get in. And when I lay very still and listened, I heard very faint and very gentle, coming from the empty, dry country where no lake has been for 10,000 years, a woman's voice, tired and loving, calling me by the small private name that only one person ever used. Calling me, asking me to come down. There is no down here. There is no water for 40 miles. And still it found me. So I am writing this so that someone will know, if I stop answering the radio one of these mornings, that I did not wander off and I did not drown, and it was not exposure or disorientation or any of the words they will reach for. I will have gone down to the water. I only pray that when I go, I have the sense left in me not to answer.